Thank you, Brian. So I really enjoy the passion with which Janis Joplin sings Christopherson's song, and Brian's playing brought that out. And most of you probably remember the key line in that song: "Freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose." And that's a good starting point for today's message. We all recognize the words freedom and liberty as foundational for our country, dating back to the Declaration of Independence. One of the unalienable rights, I still can't say it, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Never mind that liberty was generally limited to land-owning white males. However, since then, freedom was extended by the 14th and 19th Amendments and the civil rights legislation of the 1960s. We still hear politicians frequently use the word freedom as a rallying cry from across the political spectrum. What I'd like to share today is a deeper dive into the two sides of freedom, or one used frequently by the MAGA right and another by progressives. This isn't an academic exercise. I believe that the vision and goals of the MAGA right are an existential threat to our democracy and could lead to the loss of freedom. The freedom to make personal choices, to learn about history, to a decent education, and to work as a country to avoid the onset of catastrophic climate change. I hit upon this topic as a social justice service after listening to a podcast by Ann Applebaum of The Atlantic entitled Autocracy in America. The episode title is Politicized Freedom. While listening to the podcast, I decided I needed to read Timothy Snyder's recent book on freedom that we just heard an excerpt from. Snyder is a professor of history at Yale University and the author of On Tyranny, which came out in 2017. On freedom, and I have a copy here, is a fascinating read that mixes Snyder's personal history, including his time in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, with a detailed discussion of the forms of freedom. I've drawn on both of these sources for this message. I'm guessing most of us have instinctively equated freedom with democracy, the Bill of Rights, freedom of speech, press, assembly, etc. Americans love freedom. How could autocracy be a threat in our country? But as historians point out, the U.S. history can be seen as a near constant struggle between the two concepts of where freedom lives or rests. Think of the Civil War, the Jim Crow South, and civil rights battles in the 50s and 60s. Both sides talked about freedom. White racists wanted local freedom to make the rules and defy the federal government, while blacks and their allies worked to exercise the freedom outlined in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The siren call of autocracy is freedom, as exemplified from Michael Flynn's address to the mob on the night before the attack on the Capitol on January 6th. Here's Michael Flynn's word. "One of the great things about being an American is our culture. In our DNA, we feel freedom, we bleed freedom, and we will sacrifice for freedom. And then he added, "It's not something that we can take, that can be taken for granted," close quote. Well, that last sentence is certainly true. The MAGA idea of freedom means freedom from government, or really from democratic government, from checks and balances, from elected officials. They believe that if Americans are just left alone, they'll be free and achieve their best. Timothy Snyder sees that idea of freedom as fantasy. Quote, "This argument about freedom goes like this. The less government you have, the more free you are, which is fundamentally not true. If you have a very poor government, the people are not free. People are then subject to the arbitrariness and violence. They're subject to the rule of the wealthy. Just taking away government and imagining people are free is a kind of magical thinking. And you might think of a country like Haiti with the issues they're having. I mean, that's a situation where people are free from government but really are in danger of their lives. Snyder characterizes this fantasy of freedom as negative freedom, a freedom where barriers are removed, freedom from government, the rule of law, or societal norms. This idea is in stark contrast to the idea of positive freedom. This is the freedom to have access to quality education, health care, job opportunities, the freedom to pursue a healthy and productive life and leave your family on a similar path. Snyder identifies, oh, by the way, I have a printout of the page from the book. It talks about the different attributes of negative and positive freedom, and I put some copies back there. If we run out, I can make some more. That maybe help you to understand those concepts. So Snyder identifies 5 forms or qualities of freedom. The words he uses are sovereignty, unpredictability, mobility, factuality, and solidarity. Just hearing those words doesn't paint a picture of the meaning or depth of each aspect. So I'll spend some time on each one. Actually, they correspond well with the values of our UU principles. As presented in Snyder's books, the 5 forms of freedom are sequential, as in a maturing process. A child is born connected to their mother, but becomes an individual with sovereignty. As time goes on, a child widens their perspective and understands that other people are also individuals with their own essence. I see this recognition as an echo of our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of each individual. So sovereignty is a recognition of one's own worth and the worth and dignity of others. Sovereignty is a learned capacity to make choices based on one's values. The second form of freedom is unpredictability. This is also a step of maturation. A young person evaluates the world and develops values. I see this form in the 4th principle, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Another step in maturity is for one to stand up to peer pressure and to make one's own decision based on personal experience and values. Our society and commercial culture puts a high value for people to fit in, to be predictable, to be a reliable consumer. Unpredictability is the ability to adapt to the world as it is and bend it towards the world as it should be. Sovereignty and unpredictability work together to recognize others as individuals. Snyder calls this the process of declaring and accommodating. The unspoken dialogue might go like this. This is how I see the world. Does that work for you? Oh, maybe not. Let me think some more. I could be wrong. It's a process of testing one's belief, seeing the inherent worth of others and making accommodation. This process can be corrupted. Social media exists to commoditize and categorize. When one declares one's views online, a person can be pulled into the echo chamber and begin to see the world as us versus them. The third form of freedom is mobility. This is the freedom to experience and explore the world. Ideally, one can travel to other countries. I was lucky in my job that I was able to visit many different countries for short visits, and I always found it was fascinating to learn about the different cultures and think about what it would be like to live in that country. If one isn't able to travel, reading novels and nonfictions can transport a person to different lands at different historical eras. For me, reading allows me to reflect on my own life and our culture. Another aspect of mobility is social mobility. Snyder notes how this has changed since the mid-'80s. The U.S. used to be known as a country where hard work and stamina could allow a person with a low-income background to ascend the economic ladder and build generational wealth. However, in the 1980s, the political tone changed so that the government no longer worked to set conditions for progress for all, but instead focusing on removing barriers so that the wealthy could consolidate their wealth and power. The word freedom was transformed to mean the privilege of a few wealthy people not to pay taxes, to unduly influence the political process, and warp the justice system for their advantage. And if you can look at plots like how income inequality has changed over the last 50 years, and you see, like starting in the 80s, it's just the percentage of wealth held by the top, like 1%, has just exploded. The next form of freedom is factuality. This is also a fourth principle form, the search for truth and meaning. As a person who values facts and the scientific process, I find today's disregard for truth among politicians and the public at large extremely upsetting. Okay, let me be honest, it makes my head explode. I may actually start shouting. Look around. What are we doing? Climate change is a fact. The basic science is very simple. So like if you go into a car and roll up your windows in the summer, you know what climate change is like. That's like, it's a really simple concept. Okay, I'll take a deep breath. And yes, science is a process. That's the way it works. Sometimes theories and recommendations change due to new data or a new way to run an experiment. To be free, we must have a basic understanding of history and science. And guess what? The would-be autocrats are not only ignoring basic scientific facts about climate change and the solutions we could implement, but they are trying to prevent our children and grandchildren from learning about history. The war on history is very bad news for our democracy. Our kids are able to learn about the history of our country, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and not feel bad about themselves. Facing the past will help them face the future. They can put it in perspective. It's a healthy process on the path to freedom. The truth can set you free. The final form of freedom Snyder identifies is solidarity. Solidarity is a group attribute supported by countless individuals. We all need to look after our freedom. We can't produce what we need to be free by ourselves. We have depended on others to teach us, and we need to teach the next generation. I see it as the goal of world community in our sixth principle. Solidarity is a catalyst that allows young people to find their sovereignty, safely become unpredictable, and have access to history and science. As Snyder says, each of us has a right to a freedom that allows us to learn, choose, and combine values. We are not the same, but in the most essential sense, we are equal. Let me return briefly now to a negative freedom, that was brought up in the reading, in this case, the free markets. The oligarchs call for the removal of government restrictions over their domain. Their call is to free giant corporations by cutting taxes to increase efficiency and make the world a better place. But wait, government policies such as antitrust laws and government investment were the keys to the tech revolution. Similarly, the fossil fuel industry depends on grotesquely large government subsidies, mostly in the form of the use of federal land. They call for, quote, small government, but basically control that government through their through their super PACs funding elections. They also work to restrict voting and take over the remaining source of unbiased news. Just an aside here, wasn't it sickening to see at the inauguration the lineup of the oligarchs? It lays bare what's going on. Markets and entrepreneurship are powerful motivators that lead to great accomplishments to benefit society, but they need to be tempered by a government that makes and enforces ground rules. Labor laws are needed to ensure that workers aren't abused. This type of balance can be a win-win for our country. Okay, what can we do? To list actions in detail would take much more time than I have. For those who are inclined, the first thing, though, I would say that for those who are inclined would be to read this book, and then maybe share it with others. We need to exercise our freedom. We need to support others who are developing and acting on positive forms of freedom. I think our presentation last month about being open to civil discussions with people we disagree with is important. Some of us may be able to financially support the institutions supporting positive freedom, such as the ACLU, which we had an opportunity to help today, Common Cause, and ProPublica. I just grabbed off a few names, just to name a few. Finally, let's take care of each other to strengthen ourselves and our community. Let's build our solidarity. Freedom can be more than nothing less left to lose.